Hi, welcome back to this episode of True Crime Producer. I'm your host, Chantal. How are Young Thug and Trump connected? Let's dive in. So today we're getting into the second part of our Young Thug story. If you haven't seen the first one, go ahead and check that out first. We're talking about Young Thug as his trial just started. It's a heavily publicized trial. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are writing about it because it has some pretty serious consequences coming up. So as a reminder, Young Thug was indicted in 2022 under the RICO law. What is RICO? It stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act. And it was initially founded in 1970. It was signed into law by Nixon. And it was a way to dismantle organized crime groups similar to the mafia. Really, the mafia was the biggest and largest crime group that they were trying to take down with the RICO Act. So what in the world does this have to do with Trump? As a reminder, Trump was indicted in a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. What's so interesting is both cases are being prosecuted by Fannie T. Williams, who is the Fulton County District Attorney. Now, political theorists and pundits are saying that the outcome of the Young Thug case is going to hint at the outcome of the Trump case, which is one of the reasons this case is being followed so closely. So let's take a look, first of all, at the similarities. How in the world are these two cases similar? First of all, both are moving incredibly slowly. So Young Thug's case just started this past Monday, and by that point, he had been in jail already for 567 days. There are a lot of reasons for why it's moving so slowly, one of which is the fact that the jury selection process took 10 months alone. And there's a lot of reasons for the jury selection process, one of which is that it was difficult to find people in Atlanta that weren't kind of starstruck by Young Thug. And we're very excited at the idea of watching him on trial every day. And it's difficult to guarantee that somebody that is so starstruck would be able to keep a fair and open mind about the actual case. So that's the first one, is moving incredibly slowly. That also has to do with just the insane scope of the case. Part two, huge security measures around both of these cases. Trump, it's pretty obvious why you would have heightened security around a case like that. Young Thug is pretty obvious as well. However, there have been some bizarre instances, one of which was people were being accused of trying to sneak drugs into the courtroom. Next, there's a lot of pressure on lower level defendants to plead guilty. I heard one analogy by a lawyer who was describing it as trying to roll up a carpet from the bottom. So they're trying to get as many lower level defendants to plead guilty in exchange for a lower amount of time, and then the prosecutors will get more information, which can be used to really take down the head of the snake, which is either Young Thug or Trump. There's also been a lot of talk of splintering into many separate trials. Again, this is just due to the scope. It's difficult to tackle something where you have 60 plus defendants. They're going to want to change, their narratives. Perhaps they're going to want to push for a delay, among many other things. So it makes it difficult to just really tackle it. I saw one report that said it's seeming like Trump wouldn't even go to trial for the next couple of years. As we know, he's running for re-election, so this complicates matters a little bit. Both Trump and Young Thug's charging papers are being described as a corrupt enterprise. So Trump and Young Thug are being represented as kind of the head of the snake. Both of them are in charge of these allegedly very corrupt organizations. This is a little convoluted, but I think it's worth it to talk about. Young Thug is facing the reality of potentially having his lyrics used against him in the court of law. This is already a pretty controversial move on the part of the lawyers, and in part because it's seen as a violation of freedom of speech by a lot of people. And even further than that, it's being seen as a target of racist scapegoating. As we know, hip hop is a quintessentially Black art form. And to kind of pick it apart and say, well, you said this, this, and this, and now we're going to use it against you, when they were arguably just expressing themselves in an artistic form, it's being seen as targeting Black people. And then on the other hand, many of Trump's tweets during the 2020 election were mentioned in his indictment, which is potentially being used against him in a court of law as well. It seems to be that many of his tweets and phone calls, etc., are going to be thrown out. At least that's what his lawyers are going to fight for. But it creates this interesting parallel between the two cases. One has lyrics being used against them. The other has tweets being used against them. I think you can argue for both of them how that might not be the most just thing to do. But either way, it's something that people have done in perhaps a creative outlet that's being used against them. So what are the differences between these two cases? The YSL indictment, which if you'll remember from our last video, is Young Thug's record label, which the prosecution is arguing is also a criminal street gang, seems to be way more complicated on the face of it than the Trump indictment. There are nearly 200 criminal acts being described as part of this grueling gang war that YSL is involved in. So obviously having a bloody gang war in a state known for being a hub of musical innovation, which is Atlanta, and a White House case involving papers and documents and voting software, etc., on the face of it, they're incredibly different. But what makes this case interesting is how many parallels can be drawn between the two, and the fact that the Young Thug case is happening right now and can potentially hint at how the Trump case is going to end. So follow along with us as we explore the direction that this case ultimately takes place in. I think it's going to be a very interesting one, and one that I know I personally am going to keep up with. Let us know in the comments below what you think about it, what the lawyers are arguing is just. I'm very curious about what you guys think about the lyrics being used versus the tweets being used. Thank you for joining us. See you next episode. I'm your host, Chantal. Bye.